A billionaire CEO gets stranded on a cable car during a deadly storm. But the janitor she never noticed is the only one who can save her. What he reveals changes everything. Snow drifted gently over the Silvercrest Mountain Resort as Ethan Ward finished polishing the wide marble tiles of the lobby floor, the scent of pine cleaner rising from the surface as he worked with steady, practiced motions, the same motions he had repeated countless times since taking this job 3 years ago. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it kept a roof over his daughter Lily's head. At 33, Ethan carried himself like someone who had lived through storms tougher than the ones that rolled over these mountains each winter. His strong, quiet presence made him easy to overlook, and that was fine with him. The world was noisy enough without needing to be seen. He checked the time on the wall clock, just 15 minutes before he needed to pick up Lily from the resort's child activity center. She would be waiting with her little backpack, smiling the way she always did when she spotted him, her simple joy making every long workday feel worth it. As he wrung out the mop and leaned it against his cart, the glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the temperature in the lobby seemed to drop, not from the cold outside, but from the entrance of someone whose presence demanded attention, without ever requesting it. Ava Kingsley, the billionaire CEO of Kingsley Innovations, stepped inside with the precision of a blade being unsheathed, sharp, controlled, and intimidatingly polished. She wore a tailored winter coat the color of untouched snow, her dark hair twisted into a perfect knot that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. A leather handbag rested on her arm, and an expensive pair of heels clicked against the freshly cleaned tiles, echoing across the lobby like a countdown. Her gaze was fixed on the phone pressed to her ear as her assistant hurried behind her, juggling her suitcase, tablet, and a second phone that was already ringing. "I don't care what their excuse is," Ava snapped into her device, her tone clipped and icy. "Tell them the pitch will start when I arrive, not a minute before. And yes, I'm still taking the cable car. The storm alert is exaggerated." Ethan continued pushing his cleaning cart aside to make room for her entourage, though she didn't spare him a glance, her mind clearly miles away. He didn't mind. People like Ava lived in a different galaxy. Sleek cars, private jets, tight schedules, and investors breathing down their necks. She didn't know what it felt like to stretch a paycheck until it snapped, or to fix a broken heating pipe at midnight because no one else could afford to do it. As she passed him, Ethan noticed the faint tremble in her voice, not of fear, but of pressure, the kind that crushed people from the inside out. Her assistant tried to speak to her about the weather advisory, reminding her of the incoming storm, but Ava brushed it off with a hand wave, as if the wind itself should obey her. "Have the cable car ready," she ordered. "I need 10 minutes of silence before the meeting. I'll use the ride to clear my head." Silence was the one thing she never seemed to get. Ethan watched her march toward the private VIP cable car entrance, phone still glued to her ear. She radiated authority, a woman who had built an empire and didn't have time to slow down long enough to breathe, much less admire the snowfall settling softly across the valley. When she disappeared beyond the sliding doors leading to the boarding platform, the lobby exhaled as if relieved to have space again. Ethan smiled faintly. Billionaires passing through the resort was nothing new, but Ava Kingsley was different. Intense, focused, wrapped in invisible armor that shielded her from the world. He wondered, just for a moment, what kind of life led someone to build walls that high. Probably one like his, except with far bigger stakes. He turned back to collect his cart when a sudden metallic tremor rolled through the resort structure, subtle but strong enough to make tourists glance up. The tremor was followed by a sharp clang, like steel grinding against steel. Ethan's head snapped toward the massive windows overlooking the valley. At first, everything seemed normal. The cable line stretching from tower to tower, the snow-covered pines, the soft glow of the afternoon sun. But then, the VIP cabin jerked violently and came to a stop, suspended motionless above the deep white expanse. The lobby erupted with startled murmurs. People pressed their faces to the glass. A child pointed up with wide eyes. Someone whispered, "Isn't that the CEO's cabin?" Ethan felt a cold knot twist in his stomach. He knew that cable line. He had climbed its maintenance beams more times than he could count back when he worked mountain rescue. A jam like that wasn't just a delay. It was a serious mechanical failure. And the storm clouds rolling in from the west weren't slow and gentle. They were thick, dark, and fast, swallowing the sky in a matter of minutes. He was about to step closer to the windows when he felt a tug at his pant leg. Lily had come down early, her small hand gripping his uniform. "Daddy, why did the car stop?" she asked, her voice soft and uncertain. Ethan knelt instantly, shielding her view with his body. "It's okay, sweetheart. Something got stuck. They'll fix it." Even as he said the words, he wasn't sure he believed them. In the distance, alarms began flashing inside the cable car control booth, staff rushing in and out with radios pressed to their mouths, panic written across their faces. A supervisor yelled something about the rescue team being too far away and the emergency brake refusing to release. Ethan's breath stilled. Someone was trapped up there. Someone freezing. Someone terrified. Someone alone. And that someone was Ava Kingsley, a billionaire with the world in her hands. Except right now, her life depended entirely on someone like him. Ethan met Lily's eyes, saw her worry, and felt the old instinct in his chest ignite. A quiet, steady determination he thought he had buried long ago. He squeezed her hand, stood up, and whispered, "Stay with Harris. Daddy needs to help someone." Because it didn't matter who she was. It didn't matter how different their lives were. All he saw was a human being in danger, and he knew he was the only one on this mountain who could reach her in time.
Chaos spread through the Silvercrest cable car control room the moment the system's alarm screens turned red, blinking warnings across every monitor in sharp, urgent flashes. Ethan stepped inside with Lily's hand wrapped tightly around his, scanning the scene as technicians scrambled between consoles, radios crackled with static, and the supervisor, Harris, barked half-formed commands into a headset. The VIP cable car hung frozen mid-line, suspended high above the valley like a toy caught in invisible hands, swaying lightly with each gust of wind that slammed into its sides. The storm had accelerated faster than anyone predicted, its white wall of snow swallowing the mountain ridge inch by inch until visibility dropped to almost nothing. Harris slammed a fist against the emergency control panel and cursed under his breath. "The brake is jammed, remote override isn't responding, manual release is locked, and the rescue team can't get through this wind." Ethan instinctively pulled Lily closer as the room buzzed with panic. A junior staff member tried contacting the cabin through radio again, voice trembling as she repeated, "VIP cabin, do you copy? Miss Kingsley, do you hear us?" Static was the only reply. No voice, no confirmation she was conscious, no indication she even knew how severe the situation had become. Ethan could picture her up there. Ava Kingsley, one of the most powerful CEOs in the world, trapped in a suspended metal box with nothing but wind and height pressing in around her. Despite her steely exterior, he remembered the faint shake in her voice earlier, the way she snapped at her assistant, not out of arrogance but out of pressure. Someone like her didn't get many chances to feel human, and now she was facing one of the most human fears imaginable, helplessness. Harris's voice broke through Ethan's thoughts. "The only way to fix this is to reach the midpoint beam and manually release the emergency brake from the outside." His words hung heavily in the air. Every technician looked at the frozen image of the cable car on screen, none daring to say the obvious. Climbing that maintenance line in a storm was dangerous, almost reckless. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes narrowing on the screen showing the map of the cable line. He knew the structure intimately. The ladder bolted into the first support beam, the thin metal walkway connecting to the midpoint, the anchor hooks spaced every few meters for climbers who had the training to use them. He had climbed that line dozens of times during his mountain rescue years, long before he quit the profession to raise Lily after his wife passed away. "Where's the rescue team?" Ethan asked quietly, though he already feared the answer. 40 minutes out at best, maybe more. They can't cross the ridge in this wind." 40 minutes in this weather meant the temperature inside the suspended cabin would drop rapidly, every minute stealing more warmth from Ava's body. Fear would creep in faster than the cold, and panic in a confined space could be as dangerous as frostbite. Ethan watched the storm outside intensify, snow pummeling the windows like small fists. He knew what the conditions were like on that maintenance line: slick, icy, and narrow. One wrong step, one unexpected gust, one loose grip, and a climber could vanish into the valley below. Lily tugged on his sleeve again, sensing the rising fear in the room. "Daddy, is the lady okay?" Her voice was small, fragile, and it stabbed at something deep inside him. He bent down, brushing her hair back gently, as he said, "I hope so, sweetheart, but someone needs to help her." Harris overheard him and turned sharply. "Ethan, don't even think about—" But it was too late. Ethan's decision had already settled inside him like a stone at the bottom of a lake, heavy, certain, immovable. He stood tall, meeting Harris's exhausted, desperate eyes. "You need someone trained to climb that line, someone who actually knows how to move up there. No one else here can do it." A few staff members looked up with sudden hope in their faces. Others paled. Everyone knew Ethan had left that life behind for a reason. Everyone except Ava Kingsley, who was freezing thousands of feet above the ground with no idea who was about to risk everything for her. Harris hesitated, torn between protocol and necessity. "Ethan, you haven't done a climb in years. The technique doesn't leave you, and I'm the only one who can reach her before the temperature becomes dangerous." Lily grabbed his jacket with both hands, her eyes filling with tears. "Daddy, no! You said you don't do climbs anymore. You promised." Ethan knelt again, pulling her into a tight hug as his voice softened into something only she ever heard. "I know, baby, but sometimes promises have to bend when someone needs help. I'll be okay. I'll come back to you. Always." She pressed her face into his shoulder, shaking her head in small, desperate motions, but when he gently eased her into the arms of a nearby staff member, she didn't fight. She just cried quietly, which hurt him more than any storm ever could. Ethan walked toward the gear locker, each step feeling heavier than the last. The locker door creaked, releasing the familiar cold metal scent of harnesses, ropes, and climbing equipment. His hands moved automatically, checking buckles, securing straps, tightening gloves. As he lifted the helmet off its hook, memories surged back. Late-night rescue calls, icy ledges, adrenaline, fear, the feeling of the world tilting beneath him. And then the darker memory, the one that made him abandon the mountains altogether. But he pushed it down. This wasn't about him. This was about saving a life. He emerged from the locker fully geared, the storm visible through the window behind him like a snarling white beast waiting for its next challenger. Staff members stepped aside, their fear shifting into a mix of admiration and guilt. They knew they couldn't follow him, even if they wanted to. Harris clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're sure?" Ethan nodded once. "Keep Lily safe. Don't let her watch." Harris swallowed and nodded back. Ethan stepped outside into the brutal wind, the cold slicing through his jacket instantly. He tightened his harness and gripped the first rung of the ladder bolted to the support beam. Snow stung his cheeks like tiny needles. Each breath fogged the air before being ripped away by the wind. But he climbed, higher and higher, leaving the warmth of the resort behind, ascending into a world where only experience, instinct, and determination mattered. Below him, Lily pressed her face against the window, despite the attendant's attempt to turn her away. Her small voice whispered through the glass, unheard by anyone but herself. "Come back, Daddy, please." And above her father, far ahead through the swirling fog, Ava Kingsley sat alone in the frozen cabin, unaware that the quiet janitor she had barely noticed was climbing through a storm to save her life.
The storm swallowed Ethan as soon as he stepped onto the first stretch of the maintenance ladder, the wind howling past him like some living creature determined to knock him from the steel frame. But he moved with the steadiness of a man who had been forged on mountains long before becoming a janitor, each step placed with practiced precision, despite the cold sinking through his gloves and the ice that clung stubbornly to every rung. Snowflakes hit his face sideways, sharp as tiny blades, and visibility dropped until the world was nothing but white fog, swirling darkness, and the faint outline of the maintenance rail stretching toward the midpoint tower where the manual override sat. Ethan clipped his line carabiner into the first anchor point, leaned his weight carefully, and continued climbing, his breath forming fast white puffs that vanished instantly. Below him, the resort lights blurred into glowing dots, tiny and distant, as though he had already crossed into a different world, one where everything was silent except the storm and the pounding of his heart. Higher up on the line, the suspended cable car creaked under the assault of the wind, swaying gently like a lantern on a frayed rope. And inside that small, trembling box, Ava Kingsley clutched the railing with white-knuckled fingers, her heartbeat stuttering each time the cabin jerked. She had never been afraid of heights before. She had flown in jets, helicopters, and rooftop landing pads, but none of those crafts had left her stranded above an endless frozen valley with no control, no connection, and no certainty she would survive the ride. The silence suffocated her. Her phone had died minutes ago, the emergency button wouldn't respond, and the chilled air pressed into her lungs with each shaky breath. Ava paced the tiny floor, her heels slipping on the frost beginning to form along the edges, and her mind ricocheted between anger, fear, and the uncomfortable realization that for the first time in years, she wasn't the one in charge. She wasn't the one giving orders. She wasn't even the one making decisions. She was simply stuck, small, vulnerable. A feeling she had buried under years of power, success, and perfectly controlled poise. She pressed her forehead against the icy glass and forced herself to breathe, counting silently in an attempt to steady her trembling. "You're fine, Ava. You're fine," she whispered, though her voice cracked. Then, through the snow swirling outside, a faint shadow moved. She blinked, breath catching as she squinted through the fog. There, just barely visible, was a dark figure climbing toward her. For a moment she thought it was a hallucination, her frightened mind conjuring a rescuer out of thin air, but the shape grew clearer. A man in climbing gear, gripping the icy beam with steady hands, inching his way through the storm with the determination of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Hope, raw and overwhelming, surged through her chest. "Someone's coming," she whispered to herself, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "Oh, thank God, someone's actually coming." She pressed both palms to the window, watching Ethan's slow but relentless progress. Meanwhile, Ethan forced himself to ignore the drop beneath him. He didn't need to see it to feel it, the cold air rising from below reminding him that one slip could mean a fall the storm wouldn't forgive. He tightened the tension on the safety line, leaned into the metal beam, and crawled along the narrow walkway, his boots scraping against the icy surface. He couldn't see Ava clearly yet, but he imagined her panic, her isolation, her breath fogging the glass as fear closed around her. He kept his own breathing steady, repeating old rescue mantras in his mind. Slow is safe. Safe is fast. Trust your grip. Trust your training. He reached the midpoint anchor, clipped his line, and paused only long enough to wipe frost from his visor. The next stretch was harder, a horizontal beam exposed directly to the wind. He crouched low and moved forward on hands and feet, the beam vibrating under each blast of wind. For a moment the gusts strengthened, nearly pushing him off balance, and he froze, pressing his body flat against the cold metal until the wind weakened. As he pushed forward again, a memory flickered. His wife's laugh echoing on a mountainside, her gloved hands slipping into his during a climb, the moment everything changed when she fell during a training mission gone wrong. He had sworn he'd never go back up a mountain again, but today, saving a stranger felt like saving some part of himself he thought he'd buried forever. The beam widened slightly near the final connection point, and Ethan reached the cable car's access latch. He steadied himself, anchored his harness to the beam, and reached for the auxiliary toolbox clipped to his belt. His fingers, stiff from the cold, worked quickly, loosening the frozen bolts on the emergency panel, flipping the manual switch and disabling the lock designed to keep the door sealed during movement. Inside, Ava heard the faint sound of metal tapping, scraping, shifting. Her breath caught. She rushed to the door, her voice shaking as she called out, "Hello? Is someone there? Please, please tell me someone's there?" Ethan's muffled voice responded, deep and calm, despite the storm. "Ma'am, I'm right here. I'm going to get you out. Just hold on." Relief hit her so hard her knees buckled. "Oh my God, thank you. I can't." Her voice cracked and she pressed a trembling hand to the glass.
Ethan pried the door open just enough to create a small gap, the wind tearing through instantly. Ice crystals whipped around them, and the cabin swayed again, making Ava stumble forward. Ethan thrust his arm inside, bracing her with a steady grip. "I've got you," he assured gently. "You're safe. I won't let you fall." She stared at him, this man she barely remembered noticing in the lobby, this janitor who now looked like the only steady point in a world tilting beneath her feet. Fear and gratitude tangled inside her chest. Who are you?" she whispered. "Ethan," he replied. "Ethan Ward." And with the storm roaring around them, Ava felt the first spark of trust thawing inside her.
Ava's breath stalled in her throat as Ethan wedged the cabin door open against the resistance of the wind, the gap barely wide enough for a single body to slip through. And the moment the freezing air shot inside, she flinched as if struck, instinctively stepping closer to him, even though she didn't yet know how she was supposed to get out. Ethan braced one foot against the maintenance beam, one arm holding the door, and the other extended toward her with a steady palm that seemed almost impossible in a storm so violent it rattled the cabin like a toy. "Ava, listen to me," he said, raising his voice only enough to cut through the wind, calm and grounded as if this was nothing more than a routine task instead of a life-or-death climb suspended above a frozen valley. "I'm going to get you out safely, but you need to trust me. Once you're out, we'll hook your harness to mine, and I'll guide you across the line to the support platform. One step at a time. I won't let anything happen to you. Understand?" She nodded, her lips trembling so badly that she couldn't form a proper word, but her eyes locked onto his with the fierce desperation of someone clinging to the last solid thing in a world that suddenly felt like it was falling apart. Ethan reached in deeper and secured a safety strap around her waist, tightening the buckle and double-checking each clasp, even as the cable car lurched slightly, sending a sharp jolt of panic through her. She gasped and grabbed the closest thing she could, his jacket, and Ethan steadied her instantly, his hand covering hers. "I've got you, I promise." Carefully, with Ethan guiding her hands and positioning her feet, Ava stepped toward the narrow exit, ducking under the partially open door until she emerged into the blasting wind. For a moment, her vision blurred from the shock of cold and fear, and the valley below looked like a bottomless white void waiting to swallow her whole. Her knees wobbled, her breath hitched, and she froze. "I can't," she whispered, clinging to the rail. "I can't do this. I'm going to fall." Ethan moved in front of her, his face inches from hers, his voice low and steady. "You're not going to fall, Ava. You're not alone. You're with me now." He took her gloved hand, placed it on the safety line, and guided her forward until her boots met the maintenance beam. It was narrower than she expected, slick with frost, and it seemed to stretch into infinity in both directions. She felt the storm push against her like a giant hand, almost daring her to move. Her heart hammered so loudly she could hear it beneath the wind. "Ethan!" "I'm right here." He clipped her harness into his own, connecting them by a steel carabiner and a short tether, ensuring that if she slipped, he would take the fall for her. The thought terrified her and comforted her at the same time. "Now hold on to the line," he instructed, placing her hands exactly where he wanted them. "Lean slightly forward, let your body follow mine." Slowly, step by step, they began moving across the beam. Ava's breath came fast and shallow, each inhale sharp enough to sting, each exhale trembling. Every time the wind howled or the beam vibrated beneath their feet, her fingers tightened around the line, and she had to fight the instinct to crouch and curl into a ball. Ethan talked her through every second. "Good. That's it. One more step. Don't look down. Look at me. That's right. Keep going." His presence, more than his words, kept her upright. She watched the way he moved, controlled, balanced, strong, like someone who knew exactly how to tame a mountain that wanted him dead. The storm roared around them, flinging snow across their faces, and the valley beneath them disappeared completely in the whiteout, but Ethan never hesitated. With his hand steadying hers on the safety line, they inched forward until the support platform finally came into view, a metal structure jutting out from the tower like salvation itself. Ava's legs shook violently by the time they reached it, and when Ethan guided her off the beam and onto the platform, she collapsed almost immediately, her hands gripping the braided floor as if grounding herself in the solidity beneath them. She let out a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh, shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline crashed through her. Ethan crouched beside her, unclipping their tether and checking the harness to ensure she was secure before lowering himself to sit next to her. "You did it," he said softly. "You're safe." Ava lifted her head slowly, her eyelashes crusted with frost, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and her eyes shimmering with the mix of fear, relief, and something she couldn't name. Ethan looked at her, his expression gentle. "Not while I was coming for you." Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten, as though his voice cut through the layers she hid behind and reached the rawest part of her. She had never felt so small, so humbled, so protected. The woman who commanded boardrooms and controlled billions was now sitting on a freezing metal platform with her heart pounding like a frightened child's heart, and the only person who had made her feel safe again was a man she barely knew, a man she hadn't even noticed until today, a man who had risked his life for her without hesitation. The storm eased slightly, just enough for a rescue sled to be lowered from the ridge, the team finally reaching them now that the winds had shifted. As they fastened Ava into the sled, she kept her eyes on Ethan, as if afraid he might disappear with the storm. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like Ava Kingsley. She felt human, breakable, alive. And she knew, deep in her bones, that her life had just divided into before the cable car and after the man who climbed through a storm to save her.
Back inside the resort's medical room, the storm muted behind thick windows, Ava sat wrapped in a heated blanket while a nurse checked her vitals. But she barely heard the questions, barely felt the stethoscope against her chest, because all she could think about was the man standing a few feet away, leaning against the wall with his jacket still dusted in frost, his sleeves damp from melted snow, and his eyes lowered the way a man looks when he isn't used to being thanked. Ethan Ward looked nothing like the kind of hero Ava had grown up seeing. No flashy uniform, no dramatic presence, no expectation of praise. But the quiet strength radiating from him was far more grounding than anything she had known in her polished world of power suits and boardrooms. When the nurse finally stepped out, Ava exhaled a shaky breath and looked straight at Ethan. "You saved my life," she said softly, her voice still rough from cold and fear. "I don't even know how to begin to thank you." Ethan shook his head immediately, like her gratitude embarrassed him. "You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done it." She let out a faint, disbelieving laugh. "No, not anyone. I saw their faces in the control room. They were terrified. They didn't know how to reach me. You were the only one who stepped up." Ethan didn't answer, his jaw tightening as if he didn't want to be seen as something more than he believed himself to be. Ava studied him, noticing the faint scars on his knuckles, the calm stillness in his posture, the way everything about him suggested experience carved from hardship rather than privilege. She realized she barely knew him, yet he had been the one constant in her fear, his voice steady in the storm, his hand holding hers across that terrifying beam. "I want to know more," she said quietly, "about you." Ethan hesitated, glancing toward the door as if searching for an escape, but Ava wasn't someone who quit when she wanted answers. Still wrapped in her blanket, she shifted to sit straighter. "Why were you the only one who knew how to climb that thing?" The question seemed to land somewhere deep. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, eyes focused on the floor. "I used to do mountain rescue, before my wife passed away. After that, I couldn't keep putting myself in danger. Lily needed me." Ava's breath caught. She hadn't expected vulnerability, not from a man who carried himself like granite under pressure. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The sincerity in her tone surprised even herself. "That must have been incredibly hard." Ethan shrugged gently, but the pain flickered through his eyes anyway. "It's life. We kept going. That's what matters." Something softened in her then, a realization that underneath her polished exterior and his humble uniform, they were both carrying losses the world never saw. She had buried her loneliness under schedules, deals, and achievements. He had buried his grief under responsibility and fatherhood. Different lives, same weight. After a moment, Ava set the blanket aside and stood, swaying slightly. Ethan moved toward her instinctively, steadying her arm. "Easy, you're still cold." She met his eyes, and something warm bloomed beneath the fading fear. "Stay for a moment," she murmured, surprising them both. "Please." He didn't pull away. For once, Ava wasn't the woman in control. She was simply someone grateful to be alive, grateful that this man existed at all. The resort manager knocked and entered, breathless, explaining that Ava's investors were waiting upstairs for the rescheduled presentation. Ava rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar pressure of responsibility return like a heavy cloak. Normally, she would snap into CEO mode,
polished, focused, untouchable, but something inside her resisted. How could she walk into a room full of wealthy investors as if nothing had happened? How could she pretend she hadn't hung between life and death, terrified and frozen, held up only by the courage of a janitor she had barely noticed until that moment? "I'm not going to that meeting," she said suddenly. The manager blinked, stunned. "Miss Kingsley, they're already assembled." "Then they can wait," she said, her tone firm but no longer cold. "I need a moment, and I need him there." She nodded toward Ethan. The manager looked as if he had swallowed a lemon, unsure how to respond, but Ava ended the conversation by simply turning away. When they were alone again, she took a breath and faced Ethan. "I want you to join me for dinner tonight." Ethan's eyes widened. "Dinner?" "Yes," she said, a hint of a smile breaking through. "A private dinner, just you and me. I want to understand the man who risked everything for a stranger." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to being the center of attention. "Ava, I'm just a janitor. You don't owe me anything." "It's not about owing you," she answered, her voice gentler than it had been all day. "It's about wanting to spend time with someone I trust." The last word hung between them like a warm light in the cold room. Trust was rare in her world. People always wanted something from her. Money, influence, connections. Ethan had wanted nothing except to save her. Before he could respond, the door creaked open, and Lily peeked inside, her small face bright with worry relief. "Daddy!" She ran forward, and Ethan lifted her easily into his arms, kissing the top of her head as she clung to him. Ava smiled softly at the sight, something in her chest tugging unexpectedly. Lily looked over Ethan's shoulder at Ava. "Are you okay?" she asked shyly. Ava knelt to Lily's height, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. "Thanks to your dad," she said warmly. He's very brave." Lily nodded proudly, hugging her father tighter. "I know." In that moment, Ava felt something shift inside her again, not only gratitude or admiration, but a quiet longing she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge in years. She looked at Ethan, at Lily, at the warmth between them, and realized that the storm had done more than just shake her. It had opened something in her she had long forgotten how to feel. As Ethan set Lily down, Ava stepped closer, her voice soft. "Dinner tonight," she reminded him gently. "Please come." Ethan hesitated, eyes flickering between Ava and his daughter, torn between the unfamiliar attention and the instinct to stay in the background. But when Lily tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, you should go," Ethan finally nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll be there." And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew tonight wouldn't just be dinner, it would be the beginning of a connection neither of them saw coming.
The resort's private dining lounge glowed softly under warm golden lights as evening settled over the mountains, the storm finally calming into a quiet snowfall that drifted outside the tall glass windows like a curtain of white silk. Ava arrived early, dressed not in her sharp CEO armor, but in a simple, dark sweater and soft slacks, an outfit that made her look more human than Ethan had ever seen her. Still elegant, still composed, but without the steel shell she usually carried. She'd expected nerves, maybe second thoughts, but instead she felt strangely calm, as though the storm had taken something heavy out of her and left space for something new. When Ethan entered with Lily holding his hand, Ava felt a warmth ripple through her chest that startled her more than the cable car ever had. Ethan looked cleaner and more relaxed than earlier, though still a little unsure, as if he couldn't quite believe he belonged in a place like this. Lily, bouncing excitedly beside him, broke the tension by running up to Ava with a bright smile. "Hi again," she chirped. Ava knelt and hugged her gently. "Hi, sweetheart. Did you take good care of your dad after the big adventure?" Lily nodded proudly. "I gave him hot chocolate. He always feels better after hot chocolate." Ava laughed softly before standing to face Ethan, their eyes meeting with a mixture of shyness and unspoken gratitude. They sat at a table near the window where the snowy mountains stretched endlessly into the night. For a moment, no one spoke. Ava watched Ethan settle into his seat awkwardly, his shoulders tense, and she understood instantly. He felt out of place in a world that wasn't built for him. So she softened her voice and leaned slightly forward. "Thank you for coming. I know this is unusual." Ethan gave a faint smile, rubbing his palms against his jeans. "Most dinners I go to involve macaroni and cheese and Lily talking about school. This is different." "Different good?" she asked. "Different, overwhelming," he admitted, chuckling under his breath. "But in a good way." The waiter brought warm bread, tea, and light dishes Ava had ordered ahead to avoid overwhelming Ethan with anything too fancy. As they began eating, the conversation slowly loosened, shifting from small talk into gentle truths.
Ava learned how Ethan worked nights so he could spend afternoons helping Lily with homework, how he fixed apartment plumbing for neighbors who couldn't afford handymen, how he volunteered to clean the local playground whenever he had spare time. She realized everything he touched was rooted in service, in responsibility, in quiet kindness. Ethan, in turn, learned how Ava's life had shaped her, losing her parents young, building her company from a single rented office, learning to survive in a world where people only smiled at her when they wanted something. He listened without interruption, genuinely interested, and Ava felt something she rarely felt around powerful men in her world: seen. After dinner, they walked out into the softly falling snow, Lily skipping ahead and leaving tiny footprints in the fresh powder. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and the storm clouds had finally drifted away, leaving behind a calm night lit by the glow of the resort's lamps. Ava hugged her coat tighter around herself as she stepped beside Ethan, her breath forming faint white clouds. "I haven't felt this present in a long time," she admitted quietly. Ethan shot her a curious glance. "Present? Like I'm actually here. Not in a meeting, not in my head, not performing for investors. Just here." Ethan nodded slowly. "Storms can do that to people, make you realize what matters, what doesn't." "What matters to you?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked ahead at Lily, who was tracing little circles in the snow with her boots. "Her," he said simply. "Everything I do is for her." Ava watched the tenderness in his eyes, and something inside her softened in a way she hadn't let happen in years. "You're a good father." "I try." "No," she said firmly. "You are." Ethan swallowed, caught off guard by the certainty in her tone. They continued walking until they reached a quiet overlook where the valley stretched beneath them like a sea of glittering white. Lily ran up to the railing and leaned over carefully, her eyes wide with wonder. "It looks like stars fell on the ground," she exclaimed. Ava smiled and knelt beside her, brushing snow off the railing. "It really does." Ethan walked up behind them, hands tucked into his coat, the cold brushing his cheeks. For a few long moments, the three of them simply stood there, a strange little trio formed not by choice, but by fate, by a storm, by a cable car that refused to move. Then Ava turned to Ethan, her expression soft but sincere. "I want to see you again. Both of you," she added, glancing at Lily. Ethan blinked, surprised by how easily the words melted into him, as though he had been waiting for them without realizing it. Lily tugged Ava's sleeve. "Do you like hot chocolate?" Ava smiled. "I do." "Good," Lily said proudly. "Then you can come to our house. Dad makes the best hot chocolate." Ethan's face turned red as Ava laughed, a warm, genuine sound that echoed in the snowy air like a spark catching fire. They began walking back toward the resort, but the space between Ava and Ethan had changed, softened, warmed, filled with something quiet but undeniable. When they reached the elevator entrance, Ava hesitated. "Ethan," she began, her voice softer now, "you didn't just save my life." He raised a brow, curious. "You saved something inside me, too. Something I forgot I had." She hesitated, then added in a whisper, "Thank you." Ethan didn't know what to say. Words felt too small for what he felt, so he simply nodded, giving her a look that said more than either of them could put into sentences. As Ava walked toward the elevator, she turned back one last time, her breath catching at the sight of Ethan holding Lily close, the warm lobby light wrapping around them like a promise. She realized then that the storm hadn't been the most terrifying part of her day. The terrifying part was how easily this man, this quiet, humble, brave man, had slipped into the cracks of her guarded life, and how much she already wanted him to stay. If you enjoy emotional stories about courage, kindness, and unexpected connections, make sure you subscribe to Drew Daily Stories. New stories drop every day, each packed with twists, heart, and unforgettable moments. Don't forget to like, comment your favorite scene, and share it with someone who loves powerful storytelling.